Hello and welcome to this webinar from movisens, all about sleep monitoring in an ambulatory setting. So we're hoping to provide a comprehensive assessment of how to go about measuring sleep and sleep behavior in an ambulatory setting and what different solutions are available, and obviously how we can help researchers in this particular task. In today's webinar, we're going to talk about obviously a little bit of an introduction of movisens for those who don't know anything about us. Then we'll go into the actual main topic of sleep and sleep monitoring, how we use ambulatory assessment to monitor sleep, some of the capabilities and future directions, but also the limitations of the current technologies when it comes to ambulatory sleep assessment. And then we have a special guest, Johanna L. from the University of Freiburg, and she'll be presenting her work on a insomnia research project that she's currently undertaking. Then we'll have time for a Q&A, which Johanna will be staying around for as well. And please, as the presentations carry on, feel free to write any questions you have in the chat window, and we'll get to them as soon as we get to that area. Getting to know movisens. That's the beautiful Karlsruhe Schloss here in the city of Karlsruhe. And movisens is actually a spin-off from the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, from an interdisciplinary research group that was studying the relationship between stress, physical, and mental performance. And upon the realization that the tools to study these things were inadequate, they embarked on different sort of research groups to create better tools and devices, and movisens is one of those spin-off companies that came out of that particular development and that particular study. So we were established in 2009, headquartered still in Karlsruhe, and we have 17 employees at the moment, and we've been in a relatively steady growth phase for quite some time now as we take on bigger and bigger projects to serve the research community. We have an international customer base, including some very prominent universities throughout the world. So our main objective is to provide solutions for multimodal ambulatory research. So capturing a broader picture of the participant during their day-to-day life outside of the laboratory. So how they actually go about living, any particular interventions that are being tried, or any particular studies that examine their behavior. So from an objective data capacity, so it could be their physical activity, the autonomic state of, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system, cognitive function, and obviously sleep, which will be our main focus today, but also examining and combining that with subjective data from the participant themselves. So through the use of our experience sampling platform, through actually using mobile sensing, examining what they're doing with their devices, getting a broader understanding of the context, so things like weather, things like their environment, geolocation obviously is a big one, and being able to actually synchronize all of this together to provide a really broad understanding of what the day-to-day of the participant actually looks like. The reason why we favor ambulatory assessment over other methodologies is the higher precision subjective data. So you're actually assessing things in real time when you're asking. There's no recall bias. There's no effect of remembering things in a different light. We assess them in everyday life, so it's generalizable. We know that this is how they go about their life, as opposed to a very specific controlled environment in a laboratory. And through repeated assessments over time, we can see any sort of dynamic changes that may have come about through lifestyle interventions or other questions that we're putting to them for our studies. So multimodal assessment, which is something we're really big on, so examining both the psychology, the physiology, the behavior, and the context of the participant. So trying to color in the picture of their day-to-day life, as opposed to just have sort of the hard numbers of, say, the physiology, trying to incorporate a little bit more of their behavior, context, and psychology into that to fill in the blanks, and vice versa. And our favorite thing, which we've been at the forefront of over the past sort of, 5 or 6 years, is interactive assessment. So sending queries to the participant based on what they've been doing, so on their physiology, their behavior, or the context. We can actually utilize these things as triggers for just-in-time adaptive interventions or just-in-time interventions, and actually find a way of getting more data about the motivations and the intentions behind certain physical activities or the consequences of them. Now, onto our main topic. So, sleep monitoring. So, monitoring sleep in an ambulatory setting. This is me at work, obviously. Now, recently we did a webinar which I'd invite everyone to go and have a look at, which was about the 24-hour activity cycle. And obviously, sleep is a huge component and is kind of now being regarded as one of the other pillars of physical well-being, along with diet and exercise. But sleep, and in particular capturing, obtaining good quality and quantity sleep. So when we're talking about sleep, we're really just talking about a phase that's characterized by reduced consciousness and perceptual disengagement and immobility, with a MET, which is a metabolic equivalent of task, of around 0.9. So we also then have sedentary behavior, which is, I guess, the other one of the other big things that's being really studied intently lately, and its negative health consequences. And it's characterized by either a sitting or lying posture and low levels of energy expenditure, so less than 1.5. So not really doing much. Then we have this sort of broad, undefined category of light physical activity, which is anything that's between 1.5 and less than 3. So it's movement that's not sleep or sedentary or moderate to vigorous physical activity, but it's some sort of light energy that results in some energy expenditure in that particular bracket. And then moderate to vigorous intensity, and then vigorous is anything sort of 6 and above, but that's voluntary movement produced by skeletal muscles that results in a very high energy expenditure, well above the basal metabolic rate. Now, what we know about sleep. So purely from a definition standpoint, it's a naturally recurring and easily reversible state characterized by reduced consciousness, perceptual disengagement, immobility, and the adoption of a characteristic sleeping posture. Vital component of general health and well-being. So our internal circadian clock promotes sleep at night, and this is a lot to do with light exposure, and our body's temperature regulation. So I'll discuss that a little bit more later. So as far as its functions, it provides energy restoration, metabolic regulation, thermoregulation, increases the immune system adaptability, detoxification, so your cerebral spinal fluid does its exchange while sleeping, and brain maturation. Now, sleep disorders are increasing. I'm really keen to find out any sort of data of these last couple of years, now that there's been a lot more home office, as to whether that's a trend that might be reversing. But as it currently stands, sleep disorders, psychological disorders, and secondary diseases rise within our population as a consequence of modern living. So, we're civilized to death, as it were. In particular, the use of artificial light has really interfered with humanity's sleep patterns. The fact that we can be almost in perpetual daytime really is confusing for our body from an evolutionary standpoint. We're used to getting an intense pulse of light within a small window of waking, and preferably the light that's from the sun that's low in the sky has a different sort of color pattern, which triggers a cortisol pulse in our body that allows us to then, in 12 to 14 hours after that pulse, it then triggers the release of melatonin to allow us to actually go to sleep. And what we're seeing now is that data shows that only 25 to 30% of adults obtain the recommended 7 to 8 hours a night, and 20 to 35% report consistent sleep difficulties. So not just the occasional rough night, but actually a consistent pattern of poor sleep. And moving into, I guess, the context of an ambulatory context of actually studying sleep, the things that we can really determine, thanks to, I guess, the sensitivity of accelerometers now, sensors do provide a really excellent method of actually determining sleep in an ambulatory context. We can actually also observe other objective sensor data and see what their behavior is like, things like intention to sleep, recognizing different patterns and sleep habits, and also it can give us an insight into the different problems that actually might keep a person up at night. So, how to use ambulatory assessment to monitor sleep. So, our solutions for sleep monitoring. So, we have, I guess, 4 different solutions, and all of them paint a different, broader picture of sleep at night. And so we can examine things, and bear in mind, this is in comparison to an ambulatory polysomnograph, or the ones that you might wear in a sleep lab if you're fortunate enough, like myself, to visit a sleep lab occasionally and spend some, less than quality time there. When it comes to sleep detection, we have the Move 4. Now, with our sensors, the naming convention actually does mean something. It's the Move 4 contains all the different elements that are needed for a really high quality assessment of physical activity. And one of these assessments is sleep detection. Due to the sensitivity of the actual accelerometer in our device, we can have a really good differential between things like sleep, non-wear, and wake. Now, when we add the capability to assess ambient light at the same time, with the light Move 4. So we have all those capabilities that I just described, but we also can see things like the intention to sleep. So that moment when you flick the lights off and then just stare at the ceiling for hours until you finally fall asleep, we can determine what's happening in that particular window. Then we can look at things like the parasympathetic nervous system, utilizing the ECG Move 4. So we're capturing a full 1024 hertz ECG signal at 16-bit resolution, and that allows us really excellent R-peak detection to calculate things like heart rate variability, in particular high frequency heart rate variability, RMSSD, and that really can provide a nice understanding of how deep the recovery is throughout the sleeping phase. And then we can have the actual subjective sleep analysis. So having people fill in a questionnaire that actually explains their sleep quality from their perspective. And as with everything, I think the best solution is probably a blend of some of these devices and some of these modalities, because people are very different, and sometimes someone's subjective sleep report may not really reflect the actual reality of what's actually happening to their body. So it all depends on the timing. So timing is a critical thing, which we'll get to a bit of a solution for later as well. One of the most essential things is the ability to determine non-wear versus sleep and wake. So have they taken the sensor off? Is it just sitting on the nightstand, and is that being interpreted as a sleep phase? So what we're using is actually the very subtle influence of the respiration wave on the power spectrum. So we're actually seeing the movement and the very, very, very subtle sort of movement of the chest during breathing. And the best results are with a chest-worn accelerometer. So that's from a paper from one of my colleagues, Amna Baruni, and please get in touch if you would like to read that. It's a really interesting paper. Sleep detection. So here we can see the differential here between non-wear and sleep-wake, and examine the body position. So we have our acceleration signal here, and it's being used to derive these different elements based on the spectrum that's happening close in here. And if we looked in very close and detailed, you would actually see very subtle rhythmic rising and falling of different axes on the accelerometer, which is the body breathing. It's the expansion of the rib cage. That is how we know that the sensor is still being worn on the body. And you can see these little subtle moments where the body's changing position or rolling around or moving. And this was a relatively restless night. Obviously, you can see those a lot of little phases of waking up or excessive movement. Like this is probably a potential quick trip to the bathroom because they've changed body position. And Then we finally got back to sleep until this point here, where they've woken up and they're going about their day. You can see they're standing up and moving around. And here's where the sensor's actually been taken off and probably being charged, or something along those lines. When we add things in like the light move 4, we can actually see the lights being switched out and understand that there's an intention to sleep. And we can look at this sleep onset window here. So the lights are being on the whole time, and we're the sensor's being worn, and then all of a sudden it goes up to number 1 here, which is sleep. So in this window here, the intention to sleep has occurred, so they've actually switched the light off, but they haven't gotten to sleep straight away, and they've just gotten to this phase. And we can see by this it's an incredibly restless night. Gotten up for a while, back to sleep, then up for a while, and you can see that there's actual physical movement going on. So they're not having a very enjoyable evening of trying to actually rest. A slightly longer block here with a small interruption, and then you can tell there's that final concession of going, okay, I'm just getting up now. Like, I'm awake from this point here, but I'm not actually going to flick the lights on until here, or open the blinds, or whatever it is, and then get on with my day. So you can see that by adding one additional metric, in this case light, it gives us a broader understanding of what's actually happening and what the intention of the participant is at each time of the day. Now, assessing recovery, one of my favorite things. So it's a measurement of heart rate and heart rate variability, as we can see here in the Herzfrequenz, which is heart rate in German, I would presume. That throughout the day, it's gone through different periods. Obviously, this is when the sensor's been taken off and it's not worn at that particular time, or probably after a shower, after some exercise, I would say here, by the fact that the heart rate's gone quite high. And then the steady recovery over time after that, and then into sleep phase, you can tell here the sort of steady decline in heart rate and the nice low sort of recovery heart rate until this point here, where you can tell the alarm's probably gone off and they've taken it off again to maybe have a shower or get ready in the morning. And you can see the activation here in the high frequency spectrum band, in the spectrogram, where we're getting a lot more activity up here in this sort of regenerative phase of the evening. So we have an increased heart rate variability, and we can see a really clear difference here between day and night and what's happening. So then we move on to things like subjective sleep analysis. So having the physiological data is a massive, massive advantage, and you can make it even more interesting by actually getting the participants' subjective sleep analysis, because sometimes people feel that they're actually getting a better quality sleep than they really are because they're being asked retroactively. So the experience sampling platform movisens XS provides a way to collect subjective information in addition to the objective sensor-based measurement of sleep. So we can capture the different participants' feelings about their sleep patterns and quality. So what are their perceptions about it? What do they feel about their sleep quality? And this is the best part. So participants can actually set their own time to receive an alarm followed by a questionnaire, so that researchers capture this information at the very start of the participant's day. There's no time for retroactive biases to creep in, because if you ask me after I've had my first coffee in the day how well I slept, I'll probably say, yeah, okay, relatively good, or I'll be relatively indifferent to that feeling that I had when I first woke up. And yeah, I can regale some stories about that, that's for sure. So we have our own little sleep report, which is something that we provide as part of our data analysis package, our software application. And this shows you here the bracket of the sleep-wake sort of interval and the different body positions throughout the evening, and the total time, and I guess sort of duration. And there'll be future things coming along in this particular field. So, but first, I think limitations it's always important to discuss the limitations here, but also to bear in mind what's actually being replaced by this particular methodology. So the sensor position is going to be the most critical element. So it measures the acceleration at the position of the sensor. So if it's being worn on the ankle or on the thigh or on the chest or on the wrist, it's going to provide very different results. The chest is excellent because it can examine the respiration signal and, well, not so much the actual respiration signal, but the effect of respiration happening on the body. And it will then make sure to not classify that particular phase of low activity as a non-wear period. So one of the other big limitations we have is we cannot really assess sleep stages. That requires very specific technologies. So just using accelerometers and even the other data, it's very difficult to assess how many minutes were spent in each different sleep phase. And if you put this into context against a ambulatory polysomnograph, they're very expensive devices. They're very cumbersome to wear, especially if you want to analyze things like sleep stages and you've got electrodes all over you. And it's really uncomfortable to sleep with. And I can definitely say this with first-hand experience, that sleeping with a polysomnograph does not provide the best night's sleep at all. Whereas a smaller device that's more comfortably worn can provide that first window and that first level of understanding if there's an issue to discover. So on a personal note, I actually discovered this in doing a very long-term measurement of ECG on myself. I discovered that I had some sleep issues that actually required further diagnosis and going to a sleep lab and going through that whole fun and games with the German medical system. And I could do a webinar just about that topic as well if anyone would bother listening. So there's a limitation in assessing the sleep quality due to age and weight, which is where getting questionnaires and actually finding out more information will help illuminate some of this information. So actually, you have a good opportunity to capture raw data, but the data itself has its inherent limitations. So when it comes to those limitations, capturing more different signals and different contextual variables can help paint a bit better picture of what's actually happening with your participants. So future directions. The integration of a respiration sensor to assess breathing, so throughout the night, and an extended sleep report with meaningful values per night, so including things like sleep onset, total sleep time, heart rate, etc. That's something that's also in the works here. And the monitoring of body temperature to assess the circadian rhythm. As I said, it's shown the circadian rhythm is really regulated by the course of the body temperature. So it's either advanced or delayed in people who are suffering insomnia. And generally, our body temperature is at its absolute lowest 2 hours before waking. And if you can measure those temperatures throughout the day, then you can understand where the body is, what its set point is, and then involve some sort of intervention in order to restructure that set point and actually move it in a positive direction to allow people to get a better quality of sleep. Now, a past project that we were involved in was the Sleep Coach, which was a system for ambulatory assessment of sleep quality on the wrist, using what we called a sleep watch. Our creative naming convention continues. The system included a smartphone app for assessing and improving sleep quality through cause-related coaching. So it was actually a bit of a guided intervention here. So in addition to the physiological parameters, contextual parameters that influence the sleep were also recorded using sensors and the electronic diary. And we're currently planning in cooperation with Uni Freiburg and the FZE to reproduce this project with the latest sensor generation. And because I mentioned Uni Freiburg, it is now a fantastic time to introduce our guest. And our guest is Johanna L. from the University of Freiburg. And she's going to present her research on chronobiological aspects of insomnia. Johanna is a PhD student at the research group Spiegelhalter, which is Pathophysiology of Insomnia at the University of Freiburg. She's investigating the relationship between sleep and shift work and how sleep habits can be improved, and also understanding what prevents people from getting regenerative sleep and how this relates to the neurobiology of the brain. So, over to Johanna now.
Hello, my name is Johanna L. and I am a PhD student at the University Clinic of Freiburg, and I'm very grateful for the invitation to this webinar and the possibility to present my ongoing study with the title Evaluation of the Web-Based Training to Improve Sleep for Professional Caregivers Working Shifts. In this study, I am using some tools from movisens, but before I go into details, I would like to show you some background information about the study, then go further to the web-based training we developed. It's called Sleep Care, as you can see here in the logo. Then we will discuss the methods, and later on I will talk about the current status of the study. So the importance of continuous medical care has become very clear during the corona pandemic. For this 24 hours care, it is necessary that professional groups such as nurses have to work in shift work. So there is no universal definition of shift work in the international context, but mostly it can be defined as a typical form of working time that deviates from the classical normal working time. So such work that is performed at the same time each day, for example, from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Most caregivers, professional caregivers, have to work also a night shift. A night shift can be defined as a work that is performed longer than 2 hours between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. Looking at the amount of shift workers worldwide, there are estimates that approximately 15% of the full-time workforce in the USA, but also in Germany, are working in shifts. Despite the necessity of shift work in several professional groups such as medical care or also food industry, shift work is associated with several negative consequences. Predominantly, it disrupts, especially night shift work, disrupts the circadian rhythm. But there's also evidence that shift workers are at higher risk for development of diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and also obesity, for example. Also, in the social context, they have some disadvantages. For example, there is evidence that shift workers are at higher risk for divorces. Most of all, shift work can provoke sleep problems and result in sleep disorders. And the most common sleep disorder in shift work is the so-called shift work sleep disorder. It is characterized by excessive sleepiness and or insomnia temporarily associated with shift schedule. So, and that for the diagnosis, it's important that it's longer than 3 months. And several studies have shown that between 10 and 23% of the shift workers do suffer from this sleep disorder. And I think that is a lot of people suffering from the sleep disorder. Looking at the current recommendation for dealing with the sleep problems in shift work, it is clear that there are some recommendations to deal with the circadian rhythm disruption, such as light exposure, and also the excessive sleepiness, for example, with naps or caffeine. However, little is known about the insomnia symptoms and how to deal with them. So, looking in the medical guidelines for the treatment of insomnia in workers that do not work at shift work, so regular working population, there's strong evidence that the treatment with cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia is recommended to be effective to reduce insomnia symptoms. However, little is known about the effectiveness of this therapy in shift workers. Therefore, the aim of the study is to examine whether this cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, in short CBTI, has a positive effect on insomniac symptoms in shift workers. So, On this basis, we designed sleep care, the web-based training, and it's based on cognitive behavioral therapy, so CBTI. And the CBTI contains like psychoeducation and sleep hygiene, cognitive techniques, relaxation techniques, and also behavioral strategies. And for the purpose of the study, we adapted the psychoeducation, sleep hygiene, and behavioral strategies to shift work and designed a web-based training that contains 6 modules, and it is a gated program. I will show you later on the detail. So a very, very important component of the CBTI is the so-called sleep diary. It contains of questions when getting up and going to bed about your sleep and your well-being. I will talk about the sleep diary later, and it's, well, as I said, a very important component of CBTI. So now I have some photos from the sleep care so that you can have an impression about it. So this is the logo and it's called sleep care. And here you can see an overview over the 6 modules regarding shift work and sleep. Participant can read some experiences from other professional caregivers suffering from sleep. This is Markus, Petra, and Anne. But also there are some explanatory videos with a sleep expert. This is Professor Riemann from Freiburg. And they also have the opportunity to think about their and reflect their personal individual situation. For example, here it is asked, when do you go to bed at night, for example. They are, the program is guided. So as I said, they get a individual feedback on a weekly basis. So this is on the one hand this sleep training, and it is additional. The participant needs to fill out a sleep diary, as it is an important component of CBTI. Yeah, to give them some this sleep diary, we did this on smartphones, designed this on smartphones with a movisens XS app. As you can see here, this is a smartphone, and here you can see the movisens app. And we designed a good morning protocol and a sleep well protocol, and they can choose before they go to bed the sleep well protocol, and when they wake up the good morning protocol. If they click into it, the participants see some questions, as you can see here. Here we're asking if they had drank some coffee or other caffeine drinks like cola or energy drinks, and then they can click here on the right side to go further or back on the left side. So as you can see, it is very, very easy to use, and the big advantage is that they can fill it out, and it's less complicated than it has been before in other studies where normally sleep diaries have been used in form of pen paper. So for the participant, it's very easy to use the sleep diary, but also for, on the other hand, for us researcher, it's very easy to utilize the platform. So I have some screenshots brought for you. This looks like when you design on the movisens platform the protocols or the questionnaires. Here, for example, the good morning protocol. You can choose here what kind of questions you would like to ask, and then just do that. It was really easy. And then you can have here the sampling, like the study flow. When do the participants need to see, for example, the protocols? And when they do fill out the protocols, you can see as a researcher, here's participant list, for example, and you can download immediately the results and work with it. And this is very good for the treatment. So This was a very shortcut to the sleep care training. Now I would love to go further to the methods. And we are planning to include 46 professional caregivers, and they should be in age between 18 and 65 years old. They should suffer from shift work sleep disorder with insomnia symptoms. They should work as a nurse or professional caregiver at least 50%. And be, of course, shift work with a 10% of night shift work. And of course, we need to have the informed written consent, and to access the online training, they need to have an internet and an internet-enabled device during the treatment. And as it is in German language, this training, they need to have very good knowledge of German language. Participants who suffer from any mental disorder or any other sleep disorder, according to ICSD-3, have to be excluded, as well if they are taking any medication or are under serious or unstable organic disease that could affect sleep. They can't be part of the study. If they had CBTI treatment in the past or are currently in psychotherapeutic treatment or on a waiting list for it, they can't be included. And also if they are already participating at any other training program that aims to improve sleep. So here you can see the procedure. So first, they have a telephone-based screening for 1 hour, more or less. And then we start with a baseline measurement. And after this, they get randomized to the active treatment group. So they can get immediately access to the web-based training to sleep care, or they get randomized in the control group, so they will be put on a waiting list for 8 weeks. So after the waiting time and or the participation at the training, we ask them to fill out some measurements, post measurements at the second time. You can see here. And in the active group, we ask them 6 months after randomization to do a follow-up measurement. And the other control group can then access the web-based sleep training. So within this measurement points at baseline, post, and follow-up, we have several measurements, and I would like to present you these measurements. So on the one hand, we use questionnaires with a focus on sleep and work, and our primary outcome is the insomnia severity index. Also, we ask them to give some subjective measurements. As you can see, we use for this the sleep diary. Also for measurement, I told you before, with a smartphone. So they fill out this sleep diary during 1 week. And while they are filling out this sleep diary, they also are asked to wear this sensor to have some objective measurements. And for this, we use the sensor Light Move 4 from movisens, and I just want to give you some more insight and detailed information about the use of the sensor we have. So you can see here, we ask them to wear it on a wrist. There are several positions possible to wear it, but for pragmatic reasons, we ask the participants to wear it on the wrist, and we assume that the acceptance will be high. And it measures so the light, but also activity in persons. And the light sensor especially is very interesting for us because it gives some information about the sleeping environment during daytime sleep in shift workers, for example, after a night shift. So the objective measurements we will estimate with this measurement is the total sleep time, the sleep onset latency, the awakenings after sleep onset, and also the sleep efficiency. So this solution is quite more quite easier and less expensive than asking the participants to come to the sleep laboratory in Freiburg. So it allows us to measure objective measurements of sleep without asking people who are living further away from Freiburg, and then they can participate at our study. Also, we have decided to use the movisens Light Move 4 because we were convinced by the data safety and the relatively precise ambulatory measurement of sleep compared to everyday industrial materials or sensors you can use. So this will be one week during all 3 measurement points while filling out the sleep diary. So now I would go further to the current status of the study. So as you can see here, we are at the very beginning of the study. So we started recruitment on the 26th of October, so 2 weeks ago. And since then, there have been 45 potential participants interested in the study. And actually, I was a little bit surprised that there were such a lot of people for my perception, but it shows that there is a huge need of shift workers with sleep problems dealing with insomnia symptoms. So until now, there are 8 participants screened. So as you can see, there's a lot of screenings and measurements to be done. Right now, 5 participants are included in the study and will start measurement with a sleep diary and the sensor. So today, the day of this presentation. So I'm very looking forward to the measurements. And unfortunately, I can't present you any data, but I would be very happy to present you some data in a few months if there are some data available. If you're more interested in the study, we are registered in the German Clinical Trial Register, and you can see here the ID. And now I would like to thank you for your attention and also thank you to all my colleagues that are currently involved in this program and this study. Thank you.